All right, so YouTube says I'm live. So let's see if this actually works. Have a look here, play my own stream. There we go. Sorry, I'm just making sure everything works. Is it at 4K? It's not at 4K. Okay, so we'll just make it work. If it's not working right, it's fine. Yes, so hello everybody. Welcome. Sorry. I already got lost talking to myself a little bit there. Um, it's fine. And let me mute myself here because this is beyond annoying. Okay, cool. So let's close that and keep that open. So let's see. Today, the COVID hairstyle, yes, very much so. So what I thought I wanted to do today is I definitely want to break down the one or two renders that I posted yesterday, the day before, I can't remember. So this one and this one. Um, but I thought it might be fun to try and recreate one from scratch first, and I'll eventually either fail at it or end up doing something different, and then we can just open those files and have a look at them and show you how I did it. Um, Other than that, I'm trying to think if there's time left because I have to go around 4 p.m. So we've got roughly 2 hours. We'll see if we fill it and if it all works out. And other than that, if we have time, I'll try and open one of these files here as well. Where are we? It's also geometry node stuff. So these were kind of fun, sort of random recursive subdivision. But I think other people do it better than I do, but it's interesting nonetheless just to take a look at how I created sort of the scene or the setup rather. So yeah, I mean, these are huge as usual. You can get real close to them, but you can see how far the detail goes. It's like really tiny. So hopefully we'll get to those, but we'll do these ones for sure. And as usual, if there's any questions, just drop them in the chat. I threw on, what was I going to say? Yeah, as usual, I threw the PC specifications. People inevitably always end up asking it. Oh, you can't see my screen. Wow, there we go. So to reiterate everything I said, we'll start with these ones first and see if I can recreate one from scratch in a similar style and then break those down. And um, then if there's time left, let's have a look at these, like one of these with the recursive subdivision. But yeah, we'll see if we get there because like I said, I have to go at 4. So let's start from the beginning. So I'm just going to use like a generic model that I use a lot when I'm testing stuff out, and sometimes I use it for final render as well. So let me import that and then we can get started. So bam, there we go. So there's this guy, and generally I try to scale him down to something that's a bit more normal. So if that's 2 meters, then roughly that would be about the size that I want him to be. And I'm just going to apply all the transforms. So let's see. I'm going to try and keep up with the chat as well, but yeah, geometry nodes. I've messed with it a fair bit, but I have to concentrate a little bit as well. So I'm going to try and do multiple things here at once. It's been a while. So let's open the geometry node editor and let's see what we can do. So usually there's two ways I start. Either I have the lines and stuff poking out from the geometry itself, which is fine, or I have a bit of geometry that kind of goes into it. And to make that work, I'm just going to delete this bottom bit here. So we just have the outer shell of the face. And obviously I already kind of know what I'm doing going into it because I've created one before, but it's been a while since I made those actually. So it's a good refresher for me too. So let's start with a plane, and I'm actually gonna put a whole bunch of mesh lines on here with geometry nodes to kind of get that effect where it's growing from the inside out. So it'll mostly be the second one. So that would be, where are we? That would be this one, I think is the first one. Yeah. You'll see what I mean with the growing from the inside out. So there we go. So let's just move this back a little bit and we can resize this as necessary. I don't know if I've done much geometry stuff, geometry node stuff on the channel yet. The last time was a long time ago and stuff has changed a lot. So I'm going to put geometry nodes on here. And we're going to start by, where are we? We're going to distribute points on faces because we want to scatter some stuff. Unfortunately, because of the size of everything, we're going to have to up the density quite a bit. So we have a whole bunch of points. And then let me know how legible this is, because I can make the, I'm happy to make the interface a little bit bigger if necessary. And then what we're going to do is instances on points. And in that instance, we're going to throw, actually, rather than a mesh, I think we're going to throw a curve line in there. I think that's what I used. So I have a whole bunch of curved lines moving up and around. And we can always adjust this mesh down. One thing that is kind of unfortunate, though, with the scattering is that because it uses the density parameter, every time you change the shape of this base mesh, you have to up the density or bring it down. So let's see, bring it up a little bit more. We can always experiment with the amount that we need after that. So how do we get these to kind of wrap around and snap to, you know, this shape, which is what we want? First of all, I'm going to add some subdivisions to it just so it's a little bit smoother. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit H to hide it in the viewport, and I'm going to turn off renderable. It's still there, but it's just hidden. Like if I Alt H, it's still there. We can still use it, but I mainly want to focus on this object. So basically, to get the effect that we got, it's both geometry nodes and a shrink wrap modifier kind of working together. And there's no real like method to it. It's just, as usual, a lot of messing around. So one of the things I do want to do is towards the end of these curves, I want to have them sort of branch out so they cover more of that area of the head. And I think they can be a little bit shorter. There we go. Something like that maybe. And let's see, do we need to put any randomness in there? We could put some randomness in there if we wanted to. So to do that, I'm going to grab a combine XYZ vector, and I'm just going to put some randomness in just the Z value. So if I just set this to 1 and 1, the scale is going to stay the same, but the Z value is at 0. So now we can control the scale separately of the size. And then if we just put a random value in there, there we go. And let's put it like between 0.5 and 1. We plug it in there. Now we have a whole bunch of sort of randomly sized lines, and that'll work nicely as well with the other stuff that's going on. So let's see. Can't see screen. Would I make a tutorial these? Kind of. Yeah, tutorials I've noticed they take a lot of time, and with my life being what it is now as a dad, it's not as easy. So that's why I decided to do a stream, because it has been way too long. But let's just keep going with this. I want to try and finish this somehow, and after that we can do all kinds of other stuff as long as time permits. So now I have a whole bunch of lines that are, yeah, I guess, random lengths, and they're curved lines, which is fine. And now I sort of want to start adding stuff to them towards the end. So first I'm just going to distort them, and I'm going to control the distortion so that it's only towards the end of the line, so you can see the whole process kind of take place. So in the geometry tab, you have this little set position node. And the cool thing is it has a position you can set or an offset. And generally I'll throw a texture in the offset. So if you get texture, and I'm just going to use a noise texture for this. And because it's a color, it has RGB values. It kind of translates to X, Y, and Z. It works well enough. You don't have that much control, but it works. So now you can see they're being offset. But the only thing I want to control is to make sure that they're being offset from the middle. So what do I mean by that? Right now, they're only going on one direction. So you can see everything is, yeah, unfortunately, you can't see it like that, but maybe if we do it sort of like this, there we go. You can see they're being pushed both up and then to the right and to the back. And that's because all the values here are going from 0 to 1, at least they're in positive space. If we just want to offset something in both sides of space, then we just need to subtract like 0.5 from that vector, and then you'll have values going from minus 0.5 to minus 0.5, so it'll push it in both directions. And you'll see the effect that has on both of the stuff. So vector math, and again, this seems more complicated than it is, but really it isn't. It's just we're just controlling the x, y, and z values, and just by making sure we subtract this, now you can see it's pushing them. And if I would just duplicate this and set this to multiply, for example, then you can see as I multiply it, they're being pushed in all directions. Rather, if I just turn this off, it's being pushed in one specific direction. So that's really what that subtract does. And this is nice, but there's a couple of things still wrong with this. First of all, I want the ends of it to only do that. And second of all, they're just being pushed in random directions because these curves, they only have 2 points. So what we need to do first is make sure they actually have more geometry so they can deform and do all kinds of weird stuff. So there's 2 reasons this is happening. First of all, it's just the instances being pushed around because we haven't realized them yet. So in geometry nodes, you have the idea of instances within a mesh. And it just means that it's still pushing those individual points around. If I would just turn this instances off, you can see that's all it's really doing. It's just pushing them around. Let me set this to 2 so we have something to figure out from. And then it's just moving those instances. The moment I add a realize instances in here, what it's going to do, you'll see it'll change shape. Now, this has actually become a bunch of curves rather than instance curves. So now it treats this as if it was an object with a whole bunch of curves in it. So yeah, the thing is, now it actually behaves the way you would expect it to behave, but you have to make sure your instances basically aren't instances anymore. Another thing I want to do is add more, I guess, subdivisions to the curves, because now we can see they only have a starting point and an end point, and they're just kind of being pushed all over the place. And best way to do that is under the curve menu, you have this little resample curve node. And the more I put in, you can see the more detail sort of comes in. And now you can see the effect of this noise and what it's actually doing. It's kind of like a displace node or displace modifier set to RGB. And then just throwing an RGB noise texture in there. It's same idea, really. It's just we're doing it with geometry nodes rather than a displace node. But you could put a displace, not a node, but a modifier. You could put a displace modifier in between here to kind of get rid of this stuff, and then you have more control because you could add an object or you could have it warp a little bit or something like that. I mean, you could do it in geometry nodes as well, but it just depends on what you're trying to do. But for this, it's fine. And now the last thing I want is that it, almost like a tree, only blooms out more towards the end. So the way that works is we have this thing called the curve parameter, which is, I've only found this because I saw somebody on YouTube use it, obviously. Basically what this does, it gives you a value going from 0 to 1. From the start of the curve to the end of the curve, or the other way around. I always forget, so we'll fix that. So you don't really see what's going on exactly until I actually put it in. So what I want to do is I want to multiply this this output of the noise texture. I want to multiply that with the curve parameter. So let's see, and we'll do another. Actually, I could just duplicate this one. We'll vector multiply it and then put this in the second one. Now you can see exactly what's going on. At the bottom, there's almost no, almost nothing of distortion-wise going on. It still retains its original positions. And then towards the end, it kind of goes wonky and pushes out. So that's kind of what I want. I could mess with this a little bit. For example, I could put a color ramp in here. And then I could really mess with the curve itself. So you can see here, you can see it in action. The further I push it, the less of the movement there is. So that's kind of nice. You can do some really interesting stuff with this. But yeah, for now, let's just leave it at that. Let's see, maybe what I want to do is just add in a little bit, just a little bit of a curve to it, maybe. And by curve, I mean a curve on the mesh. So that way the normals of the mesh will actually push the lines out a little bit further. So to do that, we need to go back to our instancing, and we just have to set the rotation here, hook it up, and then it's going to follow sort of the curvature of the mesh. And it works out quite nicely. What we could do is just under geometry or mesh rather, we could subdivide it maybe once or twice, and now we get sort of a smoother fall off. And now it's just a case of upping the amount of stuff that's in there. And we can always go back to that. Generally, one of the things you could do to make your life a little bit easier, if I want to be able to change the density on the fly, I can just hook this up to the group input, and then I can easily change it here, and it'll all work together. So if I put like 10,000 in here, for example, you'll get more. And that's kind of nice. So we have a whole bunch of curves now, but we still need to map them to the face. And this is where like multiple layers of stuff will kind of start working together. So to do that, I'm going to use a shrink wrap modifier to start with. So shrink wrap, and the target is going to be that original mesh that we created. Now you'll see nothing's happening, and that's because the data that's still in here, and this is why I think some stuff in geometry nodes is still a little bit confusing to people. It's still saying it's a mesh, but technically if we look at the spreadsheet, then what you can see is there's actually no vertices, edges, faces, or whatever in there. It's only curves. So it has a whole bunch of control points. It has a whole bunch of splines, which is fine. So there's currently like 210 splines in here, but there's no mesh data, and the shrink wrap only works on a mesh. So to get that to work, we have to go back to our geometry nodes, and then in here, all we need to do is just say curve to mesh, and then you'll see the data change, and now it's all mesh data, and you'll immediately see that shrink wrap modifier starts having an effect. Now, another thing I'm going to hook up is just this count value, just so I can make the lines a bit more defined. You can see as I turn up the count of the resample curve here, the lines will get more definition and they'll start doing some interesting stuff. We're not quite there yet though. I mean, it's starting to look cool, but let's hide this guy again. And now it's just a case of messing with the original plane a little bit. So you can see as I make it bigger, it starts to form as it shrink wraps it over the original mesh. As we make it bigger and maybe move it out to the side, now we've got our entire mesh covered. And it's just sort of how I tend to debug it while I'm working on it. Now, the type of projection, you've got nearest surface point, you've got project. You can project positive and negative. The project is going to work from the origin. So it's going to try and project everything from the origin, which in this case doesn't quite work. Something like nearest surface point or tangent normal project might work a little bit better. And then you can mess with the snapping on the surface. So this will snap everything on the outside or outside surface. And some of it, yeah, there's no real like proper method to it. Again, a lot of this is still very experimental as I'm learning geometry nodes myself. So now we have something that kind of works, looks interesting. So how can we add even more into this? Because we're kind of there, but not really. So we're going to add another layer of geometry nodes. And I think this is something that I don't see a lot of people do. Admittedly, I have been out of the loop a little bit because my life has gotten a bit busier. But for me, geometry nodes is cool because you can jump between regular modifiers and geometry nodes and kind of stack them all together to get even more advanced effects. And I think, yeah, this could work really well. And there's a final trick to this which I haven't shown yet, which I'll add to as well. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring these back to curves. So I can resample them again, because the issue that we have now is a lot of the vertices, like the lines that you see between like these points, I want to kind of smooth these out and bring these in and sort of project them back onto the mesh if possible. And we're going to have to do that in a few separate steps to get it to work right. Again, it's not a science. As long as it looks kind of cool, it's fine. So to do that, I'm going to bring this back to curves so I can resample it once again. So mesh to curve. And then we can do curve resample once more. And we can add the count in here as well, just so we can do it from here. And we have an overview of everything that's going on. And now there's going to be more subdivisions here, even though they're not visible. And we could either do a shrink wrap again, or we can do something similar within geometry nodes itself. And there's this node called geometry proximity, which I really like. You could probably do it with raycast as well, but I haven't used it much. I still have to dive into it a little bit. I like this geometry proximity one because it really like maps them almost one-to-one and does really weird stuff and gives you kind of really nice odd vibes. So to do that, you can see this only has a position and a distance output. So again, we're going to use that same set position node, which we're going to drop in here. We're just going to put the position in there. And for the target, we need this original base mesh, which we can just drag in and put the geometry in there. And sometimes if it doesn't seem to work properly, you can just set it to relative. The reason you might want to do that is because it's, what was I going to say? Because the origin points are different. So the origin of my plane that he created is up here. And I know the origin of my original mesh is all the way down here. So by setting that to relative, it's just going to look at it sort of to where it is relative to the original object you're coming from. And now we're actually getting pretty close. You could do this multiple times if you wanted to. So again, you could resample that curve. And then again, we'd have to hook up the, the geometry here. Let's do this in a bit of a better fashion. There we go. Bring it in and then resample it, maybe even higher. After a while, I get fairly high values. So, you know, there's a little bit of stringiness here and there, but it's okay. I don't mind. It looks pretty cool. Now, this mesh in particular, if we go back to the original here, this mesh, the reason this looks so interesting is because there's like a mouth and stuff and teeth in here and eyes, which is why it kind of maps to that a little bit better and gives it a little bit more depth on the inside. I chose this mesh specifically just because I had it on hand and it's a little bit faster to work with, but at least it gives you an idea of the general technique to use. Now, before we do this, one more thing we could do is also add in another offset to the position, just to mess with it a little bit and give it more of a pattern. So again, we're going to bring in another texture node. This time, yeah, let's just keep using noise textures. They're fine. I know they work. And again, we'll do the subtraction. Where is it? Vector math. So many nodes. We'll put the color in there and subtract it 0.5 times, or subtract 0.5 from it. Now you'll see it's kind of wild because we're going to have to multiply that by something a little bit as well. Too crazy. And you can see it has another effect of just breaking that up a little bit more as well. And as I increase the scale, you can kind of see the craziness of those wires change. I guess it's hard to see, but maybe if I bring down the amount a little bit, it might be a little bit clearer. So now as I move this, as I move the scale of this, you can see the scale of the noise changing. And it's just another set of like noise and detail and stuff that goes into it. And then we could resample this like crazy, but it gets a little slow after a while, unfortunately. And for added effect, what you could do is this proximity node, right now it's just mapping to the faces, but we could map it to points, and then you can see that original mesh sort of starts showing up again. Or add it to the edges, and then it's going to follow the edges. And each one of these has its own like cool effect that it adds to. So I think for this one, I might have used edges, but I'm not sure. But we'll see in a second how I set it up. And I might have done some like minor details differently, obviously. So again, we messed with this. We've messed with the noise. We can bring in way more lines. And as you can see, this gives us, if we set it to edges, this gives us this really interesting, almost honeycomb pattern. And again, you could go even further if you wanted to, because right now we just have a subdivision surface modifier on this base mesh. And you can see as I change it, it's going to change stuff here as well. We could, for example, add a decimate modifier on here, set this to planar. And now we get even weirder geometry that it snaps to. So once you've set this effect up, you can just start messing with the original base mesh and do stuff in it there to make your to make your look even more kind of wild and interesting. So if I set this really low, let's see, it's gonna start breaking it up a little bit. Oh, I kind of like this one, I guess. Let's see what happens if we bring in a different mesh. No, it's gonna take too long. I gotta finish this first. So the cool thing is about this, with this now being a whole bunch of lines, and I'm gonna just tone this down a little bit for visibility. I can always bring it back up towards the end. We get this nice shape. And one of the things that I tend to do as well is maybe add a little bit of a solidify to it. And the reason you want to do that is just to give this a little bit of thickness. So when you're rendering this, because there's more than one layer, it's actually going to look really interesting. So just bring this down a little bit, and you could add another layer of this if you wanted to. And just play with it. Again, it's all just like trying to get more out of this base shape. Yeah, maybe something like that. There we go. So right now, if I just hit render and I throw a light in here, nothing's going to happen because they're just curves. And because we started from a mesh object, we started from this plane, we don't actually have our curve controls at the end. So we're going to have to use geometry nodes again to add in the curves. So let's see. I don't think this original account, I think this one would be the better one to add into, just so I have more control over it. There we go. I don't necessarily think this original one needs that, so let's set it to 64. But you can see every step of the way that I'm changing stuff, the shape changes. So I'm definitely not trying to do anything special. But yeah, I'll start answering questions in a minute. I'm just gonna try and finish this train of thought before I do. So to get this to render now, if we just set this to rendered, nothing's happening because they're just curves. They don't have any thickness. What we can do is we can set our, we're gonna do curve to mesh, which is going to give us a mesh again, and something that we didn't use before. We have this profile curve that we can set up. So if we just use a circle, and especially with this many lines, you want to make sure you set the resolution really low before you add into it. Now if I add in the profile curve, you're going to see everything's going to blow up, probably. Yeah, everything's slowing down because the radius is absolutely huge. You can see my computer's kind of struggling. So if I bring this down to something a bit more normal, there we go. Now you can see the final render result immediately. So you can see how quickly you can set stuff up this way. Obviously, the radius is going to depend on the size of your mesh. And then one little last thing that I like to do before that is just in here, in curve, we can set the curve radius. And what I like to do is now they just sort of start and end randomly, and you could fill the gaps. And honestly, it's not something you're going to see most of the time. It's more for myself, but just for the sake of completion. Here you can see there's like a little curve here. If we set up fill caps, then it closes. But yeah, I like things to kind of fit together a little bit better. So what I do with the set curve radius is, again, we're going to use that curve parameter, which is going to give us a factor from 0 to 1 from the start of the curve to the end. And again, we're going to use a color ramp. And I like color ramps because they very visually show you what you're doing to that parameter. So if I grab that color ramp and I set this in the middle, and I make another little flag here, and I set this to be black, then effectively what we're going to do is, if we keep an eye on this, can I get even closer? Yeah. Oh, no. Okay, so that's about as far as it'll go. If I pipe this in and then pipe this into the radius, what's going to happen is it's going to sort of make this impossibly thin towards the end. So now these strands, they sort of show up from nowhere and they sort of end up nowhere, which is really interesting and adds to the look, because now the top and the bottom of the mesh also have this almost fade to it because they start down here and they sort of end down here. And now if we just add in the number of thingies. It's going to take a while, and now you get this really kind of weird looking shape to it. And then it's just a case of figuring out an interesting, you know, lighting situation or whatever to light this. And you can play around with it. And even then, because this is a field, because it's one of those diamond-shaped slots, you could add in, if you wanted to, you could multiply a texture in here so that each individual curve has different thicknesses depending on where it is in space and that kind of thing. But I think for now we got pretty close, and I think this is an interesting point to stop and start answering some questions. So I'm gonna bring up resolution here, or the radius rather. So let's see, make it a little bit thicker. And you can still on the inside the wires are still kind of going crisscross, but I don't mind that. I think it gives it an interesting look. But yeah, we can always add more in if we wanted to. But I think for now, we got pretty close. The only thing you want to keep in mind, just again for completionist's sake, if you add a material onto this, it's not going to work because Geometry Nodes is generating stuff, and because we're going back and forth with the data so many times, we actually have to set the material in here. So I could just delete this and set the material in the Geometry Node stack, but the reason I like to throw it on the object as well is then I can easily switch over to the shader editor, and I'll do that down here. I can easily switch down here, and then I just hit home real quick. I can mess with the shader itself, but you'll see once I start changing it, nothing really happens. And that's because we haven't assigned it to the data we've generated with geometry nodes yet. So to do that, we're going to go to geometry, no, not geometry, material, and then set material. And this always takes a sec. And then what we could do is just set it to material, which we added in here. And now as I change stuff, it's going to look a bit more interesting. So red's a nice color. Maybe if we make it metallic. So making it metallic can help, and especially if you bring the roughness down a little bit to really show the complexity of those strands. Yeah, and I mean, because it's a geometry node setup, you could just throw in any base mesh you want to at this point and just be off to the races. So yeah, I would say have fun with it. And let's see if we can do one more thing to our node group. Unfortunately, yeah, this is still set to edges. So if we set this to points, we can see it change again, and it'll just kind of retain the original points of the mesh. So you can see that happening here, which is also interesting nonetheless. Or if we set it to faces, it'll just snap to the faces themselves, and it'll be even more random. So you'll have none of that original sort of feeling left over, and yeah. So I'm sure there's some geometry nodes wizards, because there's people doing amazing things with it out there that probably have a way simpler way of doing this, but this is just the way I've found it. I'm going to set this to edges because I like the way it kind of follows the edges and breaks off and still retains some of that original sort of layering of the mesh where it's like the edges are there, but not really. There's still some randomness to it. I like that. It's cool. So let's get to a whole bunch of questions before we move on. Okay. Whew. So many people out there. Some comments about the hair. Yes. I don't think I've had a haircut since the start of everything. So, but it's fun. It's been fun having long hair again. It's been a while. Do I know Rudy Sanova by any chance? He's my chemistry teacher. Is also from Belgium. No, I don't. I don't have anybody in the family by that name. Funny if we did though, but unfortunately no. So I bought the real-time motion graphics training, learned a lot. Oh, that's cool. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Can I provide a free link for the base model? Yes, let me go find that real quick. It is I think it's wiki.polycount.com. It's from the Polycount forums. Well, Polycount wiki. Is this an HTTP site? Yes. And then I think modeling down here, character modeling, base mesh, and then there's a couple here. And the one I used is this one called base mesh bust, but I'll throw in the link in the chat so you can have a look at it. There we go. So somebody was asking, I think, how I mute the nodes, but somebody else answered to you can just hit M on the keyboard. Yes. Let's see. Hello, everybody. Yes. PC spec stuff. So lots of PC stuff. Possibilities are endless with this technique. Yeah, I mean, this is just one set of stuff to do to it. Like with the noise texture, we could always go back and add something else. So I think somebody said Voronoi at some point. So if you throw in a Voronoi texture, then it's going to look different again. So if we throw in color here and mess with it, then you'll see the pattern change to something a bit more Voronoi. And Voronoi also has that position output, which gives it really harsh and weird colors. But you can see as we change it, we might have to do another layer of shrink wrapping or what is it? Proximity, geometry proximity noding to get it back onto the mesh. Like it's a constant fight with pushing it back on and off to the mesh. Again, I'm sure if I figured out the raycast node, I could work way faster and not have to do these multiple steps. But this is just the way I figured it out for now. So, but you can see as it changes, like even if we, because the noise is still in here even. We just subtract that. Throw these out. It gets a little slow for sure. Now there's no mesh, so now half of it gets pushed. So again, it's the fun thing about this stuff, right? You set it up and then you forget to connect a node and suddenly you get a completely different look. So here you can see the position changes it completely as well. Bring this down. And then we haven't even messed with the different sizes of it and everything. So that's fine. I'm just going to put it back to what it was with the noise texture. There we go. We could add in a little bit of distortion just for laughs to break it up a little bit more. And again, if we wanted to get more coverage at the top of the head, for example, what we could do is just go to the original geometry nodes, the first one, and then just change the size. So if I set this higher, then they're going to stick out even further, but it's going to be more here at the top, and the mesh size, it's going to be a bit more closed. But I kind of like that sort of almost unfinished look where it fades from the bottom to the top. You get, like, you could almost render it separately like this because it kind of disappears. But again, it's up to you. So let's see more stuff. Oh, chat just jumped around. Okay, I'm gonna try to keep up with this stuff. Have you ever played with fractals exported as meshes? And if so, have you tried to capture them using photogrammetry? And if so, any tips on that? Honestly, the fractals that I rendered a while back, I just rendered them with Mandelbulb, with the application you can use to generate them in the first place. You can export them, and I've tried it, but it's extremely slow, and the meshes are just so intense once you get up to a detail level. Yeah, because it's such a like hardcore computational thing. It's not worth trying to convert it to a mesh. So I just kind of stuck with Mandelbulb, and if you've never heard of it before, it's another open source application. And let me just zoom in a little bit here. Oh, wrong window. There we go. Ah, I changed some shortcuts recently, and I'm still getting used to them. There's also Mandelbulb 3D. That's a paid application, but this one is the open source kind of counterpart to it. But yeah, there's more than one option. The cool thing with this is it has, since a couple of updates, it has like proper global illumination and that kind of stuff. You just kind of have to look through the menus a little bit. It is definitely not the most user-friendly application ever, but once you get the hang of it, you can do some really cool stuff. So yeah, very enjoyable. All right. But yeah, fractals with photogrammetry, I guess you could try it, but you're rendering them already at that point. So what's the point? Like if all you need towards the end of the day, at the end of the day, is a render, then why try to get it into Blender and render it super slow with a lot of annoying stuff when you might be able just to get the render from Mandelbulb. Yeah, I would do it in there if possible, but it's not an easy application to figure out at the start. So let's see. I only have an area lamp. Yeah. My lighting is usually, especially for these like portrait type things, is usually very simple. Maybe one or two lights. Like for example, for this one, let's try and like finish it a little bit. Just add in my stuff here. Just gonna add in a camera, and then usually for Instagram, I'll do 2048 by 2560 because it's the right aspect ratio, and then render it at like 300 or 400% for the final thing. So there we go. And then for portraits, yeah, if you look at your focal length, generally in photography, portraits are going to be 70 millimeters plus. You can do 50 as well. You could do any focal length, but to get almost like a photographic look, I tend to be around 70 millimeters or higher. And then let's see, can we kind of look upward to make it a little bit more epic? Now, obviously, this mesh doesn't have a lot of emotion to it. It's just a very simple base mesh, but there we go. And then it's just a case of adding in some depth of field. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm actually going to grab an empty, move it up, and sort of try and move it around the eye area. There we go, somewhere around there. And then we can use that to add depth of field. And in portraits, you're generally going to focus on the eyes. And you can see it immediately does a lot for the image as well. And to get that real moody feeling, yeah, volumetric is going to be your best friend. So as long as you're not using an HDRI or sun, like a sky texture, you could just put the volumetrics in the world slot. So here I have my world output, so same as up here. And I'm just going to add in a principled volume shader. There we go. And then just pull down to density a little bit. And then maybe as a second light, I can bring in one just kind of coming from the back, just to light up the edge of that mesh. So now we're getting a lot of really nice reflections over here, but it's also lighting up my volume and it's making a lot less moody. So generally what I'll do, well, not always, but sometimes what I'll do is go into the ray visibility tab and just turn off volume scatter. And now let's see, did that make a huge difference? It should. Oh, but I turned the world. I'm not doing the light. I'm going to the object and then visibility. And then under ray visibility, if you turn off volume scatter, now you'll see it won't actually affect the volume. So you'll get this nice fall off from top to bottom, just from the top light, but you can still use this one to light up the rest of the mesh. And you can even turn off diffuse, for example. So it's not actually bouncing the light on the diffuse portion, but it's only showing it in the glossy portion. But in this case, it doesn't make a difference because I think our, let's see, our thing is metallic for the most part. Yeah. So if I turn that down, and you can do other stuff like add subsurface to it and things if you really want to make it look very organic, but that's a whole other can of worms, which I'm not going to open right now. But yeah, you can mess with it. Obviously, it's up to you to choose what you like and what you don't like. So, but yeah, not too many lights. It's personal preference. And maybe bring the size of this down a little bit. And as we move this one over, just kind of maybe do that. And now this portion is kind of nice and dark, and we have a really nice bright here, and we have some contrast in the image. I can bring it up a little bit, but I'm trying to avoid lighting that shoulder. So you're really just kind of painting with light. There we go. That looks kind of cool. So I'll do some more questions and I'll open up the other files just to see how they were done. I'm actually going to save this one just in case. In case I want to do something else with it. There we go. Okay. So let us open the previous one, and I'm gonna gotta make sure I'm in the right thing here because I copied them over so I wouldn't mess them up. I think this is the first one. This is the one with the red in it. So let's do some more questions. So I saw scene lighting. If I've missed questions, I'm sorry. There's a lot more questions than I'm used to. Yeah, feel free to just tag me and then. So somebody says, kind of getting some Beksinski emaciated figure vibes. That's actually one of my very favorite artists ever. I think he's one of my main inspirations. So this is something completely different. I don't think this is the one, so let me just double check what number we're on. One. Is it this one then? Just the one called Untitled.blend would be typical if it was. So have you ever played with combining 3D art with photography? I've been trying to do a little bit like VFX wise with film. But it's not, yeah, I don't know. It's fun. I just don't really do it that often. I'm still trying to figure out a really good sort of color pipeline to do everything in because if I film with the camera, it's raw footage, and then I have raw images as well coming from my photo camera. But I need to find a good way to bring Blender's EXRs in there, and Aces is a thing, but in Blender, using Aces in Blender is just a pain in the butt, and it messes up a lot of stuff in Blender. So I'm still trying to find a good way of working things out. So I think I might do some compositing in Fusion rather than in Blender itself at some point, just so I can stay within Resolve's color space, but we'll see. Because I've been using a lot of Resolve to edit and grade and that kind of thing lately. But I haven't figured it out completely yet. So let's go to Geometry Node Editor, and I think we'll see something quite similar here. So let's turn these off and just go step by step. Yeah, so you see something very similar to what I was doing before. Here, I'm just adding, let's see, here I'm doing the geometry proximity first rather than doing it second. And then I think I do another round of it. Oh no, I just resampled the curve. I don't know why I did this in separate things. That could have been done perfectly fine. I think there was a modifier in between here at some point. And then I shrink wrap it. And then because I'm using project, I made sure my origin is sort of here in the middle. And for this one, it works out because it kind of almost pulls them over the face and makes them look really weird. So again, a lot of it, once you got it set up, just kind of depends on what you want to do with it. And I think for the final one, it's mostly meshing. This is taking forever for some freaking reason. So let's see. I'm gonna keep talking. So the same could be done using a simple hair particle system and a shrink wrap. Yeah, I would say so. And you probably wouldn't even have to use a shrink wrap. You could use a force. We'll try that in just a second. We'll see if we can do it with particles, because that would be a fun exercise to try and replicate it. Because that's the thing with all the geometry nodes madness right now. So here I've put more, you can see I've added more textures to it. Yeah, I've added more distortion and stuff to it, to the things. So you can see I'm grabbing the position of the lines and just distorting them a little bit more with textures, the same way I did with the other one. So there's nothing truly mind-blowing here. It's just the order of operations is different. So again, it's all about just combining techniques and figuring out which order to put them in and getting different effects depending on which order they're in, that kind of thing. So it's kind of fun. So yeah. You can see here, there's a lot of geometry going on here. I could have resampled that down a little bit to maybe a little bit less. Here I subdivide it in a different way. I subdivide it before I change it back to a curve and then do stuff. And you can see I hadn't, I don't think at this point I had seen the curve parameter or used it yet to kind of flatten off the ends of them, even though they do it here. So I don't know. I don't know what's going on. It's fine. It's no big deal. You don't see it in the render, which is okay. And then that red glow that you saw, because it was the first one, because I'm kind of getting stuff confused here. So you can see I actually grabbed a very similar sort of angle to the red one that I just made. And all this red glow, there's just a light inside, and all this red glow is just done in the compositor with the glare node in Blender itself. To kind of make it look more interesting. So with that done, I think the next one is for the other render. Yeah. So let's look at that one. So that's this one, the sort of original inspiration to start here. Let's open it new. I don't want to mess with it. And then four, and you can see I do a whole bunch of them, and some of them work out, some of them don't work out. I tend to just kind of start over if it doesn't look good. Do, 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 do. Come on. Maybe this work was inspired by his new hair. I don't know. Maybe subconsciously somehow. So here you see there's another particle system added in just for like dust and all that kind of stuff. So we'll see. Let's see what the order is here, and I can see I did a lot more shrink wrapping, and not all of these things are done. So this is actually on the original body mesh itself, it seems. So I'm just going to go into edit mode, and yeah, it's going to take forever. I'm going to also turn off the particles, because that's going to mess with the stream compression, I think. Come on. Why did I do this? Oh, no, okay. This started from a plane as well. So, and just from a very small one even. So there you go. I should really turn down the number of lines, but that's fine. So let me turn off the thing here first and look at some things. So somebody asked, what distro do you use? Also, weird thing, I was just watching streamers yesterday. So I've been on Void Linux for quite some time now. Yeah, a year, maybe longer. I don't know. I try other stuff as well. I have two hard drives in my computer, so I can jump between two different ones and mess with them and try different things. But here you can see that how that mesh, because it has teeth and a mouth that's been modeled. I can't remember if this was done with either MB Lab or HumGen or Human Generator, the one you could buy. But because you can kind of see the eyeballs in it as well if you go on the inside. But that just gives it a little bit more, yeah, stuff kind of going on as you render it. But again, geometry nodes, similar stuff, distributing the points on the little plane down here, shrink wrapping it. There's a displace in here that just pushes stuff out. So here, this is what I was saying earlier. Instead of doing the displace in the geometry nodes tree, you could also add a displace node. And because they're just lines, because they're just mesh lines, you'll see if you just add a regular displace, it's going to push them off to one side. Sort of the same problem that we had. But there's a setting in here that says RGB to XYZ. And the cool thing is if you, it's doing exactly the same thing as in geometry nodes. But the cool thing is if you then add something like a clouds in here and you set the color instead of grayscale, what it's set to by default, and I shouldn't have changed it because now it's going to try and reevaluate the whole stack again. If you set it to color, you'll get like a 3D almost vector-like displacement with the modifier. And you can push stuff out to all directions, which is really nice. I shouldn't have done this. But it's fine. It's no big deal. Once this moves over, again, more stuff. So your actual image shows the model screaming or something. How can I achieve something similar? Or let's say I have some expressions. Yeah, just by using a base model that has that expression. Like I said, I use MBLab and Human Generator. So MB, I think it's mblab.dev. Come on, zoom in. I don't know how the website's going to hold up. Unfortunately, it hasn't been updated in a while. It still works, but yeah, it hasn't been updated in a while. This is the free one, or Human Generator. It's called, I think, on it's on the Blender market. It's a little bit more. Yeah, both each one of them has advantages and disadvantages. But yeah, you can generate humans with it as well, which is kind of fun. It's on the, but this one is you have to pay for it. So, but again, it's decent. I mean, over 5,000 people have bought it, so I'm sure that speaks for itself. So let's see if there's anything else to this one specifically. So again, I changed that texture, and then this is just more shrink wrapping and displacing. So here I'm doing more with modifiers, and then in the geometry node stuff, I'm just doing a final geometry proximity and just changing it back to like curves that you're able to render. So yeah, similar all around. There's another one which I can show you, which I hadn't posted yet. This one, but this one is just, it's not as advanced. Let's see if we can zoom in a little bit here. It's going to take a second to load. There we go. Really, it's just almost all of it is these little cubes that I've scattered on the mesh. So has a similar vibe to it, but it's a slightly different technique. But it's a lot less advanced than the stuff that I was doing there. So. All right, we're roughly an hour in. I'll answer some more questions and then move on to the other renders that I showed and see if there's anything else from there. They're a little bit longer ago, so I have to make sure I remember how I did those. But yes. Deck End Edition 2, when? I don't know, man. I don't know. We're still waiting for all this craziness to blow over, I guess. Yes, so a lot of people. So somebody said, how come my Cycles viewport is so clean so fast? It's really down to what you're rendering. Obviously, a good graphics card helps to get it clean faster. But because this is all geometry, it renders incredibly fast in general. Cycles is pretty good at doing like a couple million polygons and just rendering it crazy fast. So that also helps. So I see people have already done some stuff. Do I have any plans for making a course with GeoNodes in the future? I originally planned to add an update to my RTMG course, like a free update, but honestly, the RTMG happened because our original conference, our physical conference, got canceled because of all, the current situation, obviously. And I had a couple of months of spare time where we could really dive deep, and I would love to add a geometry node section to it, but I don't know if and when it's going to happen at this point. I know I said to some people I was going to do it, but yeah, life, man. That's what it is. So we'll see. Like I said, I'm not promising anything anymore because I don't know what's going to happen. Can we add random points on the mesh to control where the bigger gap in curves are? Sure, I'm sure. Yeah, you could do it. You could probably scatter points on that mesh and then set it to points, or you could connect them somehow and then set the geometry proximity to points or edges, and then it'll find those and you could kind of push them out. I think it's going to be down to messing with the base mesh you're mapping it onto and then playing with the geometry proximity to get it to work, I would say. So, Do I know a way to loop textures in geometry nodes? I haven't dived into it deeply enough yet to get it to work, so unfortunately not immediately. Do I also use Houdini in my workflow? I've used it a little bit in the past, and I still have an active license, and I mess with it every now and then. Um, but yeah, I mean, I know Blender really well at this point for what I like to do, and Houdini is sort of starting from scratch, so it's generally quite frustrating when I try to do something because I know I could do it fairly quickly in Blender. But for specific, like very Houdini specific stuff, I'll use it every now and then. I think I want to get into the simulation tools a lot. Because Blenders are decent, but Houdinis are a step above that. Because kind of that's what it was built around from the start, as I understand. So what would you recommend should be the process to learn 3D tutorials and courses? You end up forgetting half the things after completing a long tutorial. Just make stuff that you think is cool. Try and use the information in a way that benefits you rather than just copying the end result. Try and do something like try and think outside the box with the information that you're getting. That's always how I found I kind of retain information a lot better is when I'm trying to make something that's actually something that I like that I think is pretty cool, then you tend to kind of remember a lot more. Because I see a lot of people, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I see a lot of people like following my stuff and then creating quite similar renders. Um, and it's good. I'm glad people are learning from it, but I also sometimes it kind of doesn't necessarily make me sad, but I always feel like, come on, you're at that point now where you can start pushing it further, where you can do kind of wild stuff with it and try and push things even further along than you could. Yeah, so look at tutorials as starting points rather than a finished project. I think that's a better response. um, so let's see. Um, So I'm just going to skip a couple things because I want to make sure. I don't have an HDRI light. It's just two area lights. Have you thought about doing a symbiotic effect where the symbiote interacts with objects or walls? Yeah, you could do that. You could add all that stuff in. I mean, these are experiments. I like human meshes because they have a lot of sort of interesting curves and detail already in them, and just to mess with them is kind of fun. Again, a lot of this stuff is me just figuring things out. So. Um, And then, so same question, but Houdini or ZBrush? I'd never use ZBrush. I've tried to learn it a few times, but the UI just puts me off every single time. I can't get past it, unfortunately. And I don't sculpt that much to begin with, so. So thank you for everybody saying thanks. I appreciate it. So you should visit Poland someday if you like Beksinski. Yes, and I know I'm butchering the name. I have a Polish friend who was here recently, and I was talking to him about it, and he gave me a look. And I can't remember what he said, so I'm sorry for butchering the name. But yeah, I would love to visit Poland and then visit him as well. That would be cool. So Ian Hubert et al. Just released a full spectrum color tool. Okay, I'll have to check it out. Yeah, I have to figure it out then. Could you please share how you've organized your screen space with the user before? Because I find this more efficient and minimal. Well, there's really not that much to it. I delete all the stuff at the top. I want to have as little stuff as possible. So generally when I start Blender, you'll see if I just start it, it's just a small little thing down here. Basically, I've taken the like default, which is the outliner up here and the properties down here, and I flipped it over to the other side. I don't know, for my head, it works better that it's over here. It's like my stuff is over here and I can work over it on the right side. Other than that, yeah, all you need to do is just go to defaults and then save startup file. So once you've set up your file and it's empty and you have it the way you want it, you can just hit save startup file here. And then whenever you start Blender, it's going to start in that state. So it's kind of nice. So I just want to ask, you think the techniques you implement could be presented in a conference or written in a paper? There are a lot of journals on modeling. Whew, I don't know if I mean, you could. There's no problem there. But it would take quite a lot of work with a lot of screenshots, and you saw the amount of nodes it was. So it would be kind of wild to try and explain that with text and screenshots. But you could if you wanted to. I mean, if you want to translate it, go for it. I don't mind at all. That's why I'm showing this stuff. It's all just, yeah. And then I can see my brothers are in here, both of them, trying to goad me into saying who my favorite brother is. So I'm going to give you a very non-committal answer. Both of you. Um, can you talk about that material on the simple cube scatter model? Yes, I can. Unfortunately, it kind of sucks because it's a material I bought once and it's not available anymore. And I don't know if I'm allowed to share it or not because I don't want to piss off the guy that originally made it. But it was called Prism Glass. I can still find stuff, but no, they're just going to get glass prisms. That's not going to work. So if I just do a new blender here, and let's add in an icosphere, because this is a material that I use in like 2.78 or whatever. But I still have it on my drive because I feel like it still works really well. It is a little bit noisy, but that's fine. So in my shader lib, it's called Prism. There we go. And then the node tree is Prism Glass. And then it just gives you a little node that you can use. So I'm going to throw out the principled here and just add in group Prism Glass. And if you go into it, it's a wild shader that somebody spent lots of time on. I generally just use the little node group. And if we add a light in here, you'll see it does that really nice prismatic stuff. Now, that being said, it has roughness, you can control the amount of dispersion in it. It's really cool. It works really well. That being said, if you look for dispersion shader on stuff like Blend Swap, you'll find free ones as well that work pretty decently. But this one, it used to be called Prism. It was on the Blender market, but it's not anymore. Yeah, I mean, if you send me an email, I don't mind sharing it. I just don't want to put it somewhere public, just in case the original author wouldn't appreciate that. Because I can't remember. Yeah, I'll have to figure out. Sorry about that. I accidentally hit the mic. I have to figure out who it was and contact them. But yeah. So let's see. Compositing on the third one. Yeah, the compositing, honestly, most of the compositing, and I can show it even on the prism thing here, if we just add a little bit of roughness there and just go crazy with the caustics intensity. It's going to add a camera, and I'll show you the main effect with all those light streaks. It's really just one node in the Blender compositor that does that. So I can show that really quickly before I move on to the other stuff, because it's already 3 o'clock, and like I said, I have to end at 4. So there we go. Let's just let this render out a little bit. That's fine. I don't mind if it's a little bit noisy. Go to the compositor, load in our render result, and then in the compositor, we'll add use nodes, and then it's the glare node. So under filter, we've got glare. And by default, it's set to streaks. So I set it to 2, and then by offsetting it 90 degrees, it's actually just going to point up and down. You can see them already showing up. And then you can add some iterations. It just adds a little bit of smoothness to it. And then as you up the fade, these are going to get longer. So it's kind of wild. And then the big one is this color modulation, which kind of breaks up the RGB channels in the streaks. And then you get these really wild sort of color modulated streaks. So it's just that. Really, that's all it is. A lot of my compositing is just a little bit of glow and glare. Most of the time not even, and then just some softening, sharpening, and a vignette. So yeah, but this is a really fun little node to play with. So let's see, how many blenders have I got open? Just the 2, so that's fine. And let's start new again. I'm gonna go a little bit quicker for these last ones. So Prism Glass made of Eric Idolo. Oh yeah, I think that name rings a bell. So yeah, if somebody wants to get in touch with him and ask him if we're allowed to share this, I would be more than happy to, because I still have a copy of it. So next stream when? I don't know. Let's hope it's not another 8 months. So we'll see. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff about geometry nodes and RTMG. Like I said, I'll see. I don't know whether I'm gonna. Yeah. Can you tell us how you do come up with ideas like that? Your work is different, and I could never come up with ideas like that. It's not really about coming up with ideas. It's just about what does this node do? What does this node do? And just kind of stringing them together as you're learning how they work. Honestly, that's kind of how I do it. Yeah. So I'll come back to the questions. I'm going to first start with these. So these are kind of fun to make. Yeah, so let's do that first. And I've actually found a bit of a new take on it even. So we're going to open up a geometry node editor and we're going to add in a plane. And I'm going to turn on wireframe here so we can kind of see what we're doing. There we go. So now when we do stuff to it, we'll actually get a new wireframe. So to do this kind of recursive subdivision, what I'm first going to do is just subdivide it a little bit so we have some squares to start with. And you could put an array of these. You could do all kinds of stuff, and I'm just going to do it on a single plane to keep it simple. So the way I do is I select out a whole bunch of squares, subdivide them, then join everything back together, and then kind of repeat the process. So the cool thing is, first thing I'm going to do is split edges. So that means now these are all separate polygons. And then what I can do is, I think geometry, separate geometry. And in the selection, I'm going to throw in a texture. And really all that's going to do is it's going to use a texture to select geometry. So you'll see as I throw this factor in here, nothing's really going to change because unfortunately the noise is like between, let's say 0.25 and 0.75. So there's no 0 and 1, and the selection sort of needs 0 and 1. So what I do to alleviate that is add in a color ramp, and then I can actually start making a selection. So now you'll see we have a selection that we can use to separate parts of the mesh. And rather than set this to point, because you can see, you hopefully may or may not be able to see, there's still lines here. I'm going to set this to face. And now we can just get a selection of random things. And what we're going to do is we're just going to do this. We're going to grab this subdivide mesh. We're going to add this to the selection. I'm just going to set the level to 1. So this is actually quite similar to the script I wrote once. But the thing is, if we don't do the split edges, then sometimes you get weird stuff going on. In our case, it wasn't necessarily needed here. That's fine, but we're going to add it here just in case. And then this inverted selection, which is the rest of these squares, we can add that back in just by adding a join geometry. So join geometry, and then we can add the split ones that have been subdivided. There we go, and add it to that. And now the fun part of geometry nodes is that what we can do is we can grab these, hit Control G to make them a group. And that group has 2 inputs. It has the factor and the geometry. So now if I duplicate this, I can get real lazy with it. And in the noise texture, I can use this color output. And because it has a red, green, and blue channel, which each has its own sort of set of noise, I can sort of optimize this by going to vector and then separate X, Y, Z. So in our case, it's just going to separate R, G, and B. I'm sure you could do it with a separate R, G, and B node as well. But I can use X for this, Y for this, and now you can see the factor is going to change again. So we've got 2 sets of subdivisions, and we can do this as many times as we want and add in another factor. And you can kind of see how that starts moving along. And really those renders are just a more kind of advanced setup. I've done this a couple of times. So what you could do is just copy all this stuff over. There we go. Pipe that in here. And all we really would need to do, so come on, there you go. All we really would need to do is just mess with the scale so we get a slightly different pattern. And here you can even see the noise pattern sort of showing up. And again, that's the fun thing of geometry nodes. Like once you have a setup, you can copy it over a whole bunch of times and then mess with it as much as you want. And we could go even further, grouping this and adding extra nodes everywhere, but this is fine. And then it's just a case of splitting them up, which, yeah, all I'm doing is just using a smooth modifier after this because we edge split everything. And now the smooth modifier is going to give us this really cool little pattern. So there you go. It's a very quick intro to do it. So let me open up those files to actually show you how they worked. I'll start with the first one because the first one also has the same mesh, but then with a wireframe on it and that kind of thing. You'll see in a second. So let's hope this doesn't take too long. There you go. Again, same idea. This main thing here was mainly just to block some light and mess with the reflections a little bit. But as you can see, there's two meshes to it. And the original plane, it's in here, I think. Can't remember. Yeah. So the original plane is created with geometry nodes, and then it's to get the same result in two different objects. What I'm doing is I'm just referencing that original object. So if we go to geometry nodes, so this is the wireframe one. So you can see it's just grabbing the geometry from the first one, which I created. And this is where all the sort of magic happens. And it's very similar to what I did before. Let me just zoom in a little bit. So this one even starts with some no, this one isn't even being used. So I just created a grid at some point. And you see that same group with those same textures splitting stuff up. So here I even gave it names. But yeah, same idea, exactly the same idea. Split all the edges and then set materials for it. And then there's just two versions. One of them is just the, yeah, they're not going to move because they're referencing a different object. One of them is just the little blocks. I think the first one is a wireframe, yeah. And the other one is little blocks that has a, whatchamacallit? Where are we? Has a solidify set to it. So there's other stuff going on in here as well. Let's see. So it references the original, it smooths to get the gaps in between. Okay, and then I'm redoing the whole thing, so it's not as efficient as it could be. Again, smoothing it out. And then the final geometry nodes is just to set materials again, because they don't always get materials when you start referencing stuff and messing with them. So again, fairly, yeah, simple ideas, but it's just about the details and the repetition and that kind of thing. So let's see if we open a second one, if there's much different, but I doubt it. I think they're all kind of based on the same idea. Yeah, looks like it. So if we go to our geometry nodes here, I think I was even super lazy and just copied it over from the other ones. So there's one main one, yeah, that has a few subdivisions, and then there's another one that grabs that main one and pushes it even further. So I think it's maybe in here. You see exactly like the same stuff that was in here that's not being used is also still in here. So I'm doing the same thing, only towards the end here, all I'm doing is adding a delete geometry node, so we get parts of it that are kind of gone. So we get those two layers. And this was kind of partly inspired by when you look at like pictures of CPU or GPU dies. I kind of like the way that looked. And yeah, let's have a look if we can see. Yeah, so this kind of stuff. I thought that looked kind of cool. This kind of thing. So you see how it has all these like little different layers and things. So I was looking at one of those one day and figured I wanted to try and make something similar that had that similar feeling. So when you look at it here, the second one, you can see it has sort of that glass metal-y type feeling. And the last one, I mean, I'm not going to show because it's the same idea. Again, some of them are just deleted towards the end. And then it's a case of getting the line, to get the lines to line up, I guess, and make them straight. in my camera, I'm using an orthographic projection rather than perspective, and that just gives it this really sort of technical, perfect, yeah, look. Yeah, and a lot of the cases I set this up and then I mess with the textures to find interesting layouts. And like for this one, the middle one here, there ended up being a hole in the middle, so I ended up centering my my composition around the hole to make it look a little bit more interesting, and you can see that in the render as well. So there's like a hole here. So I try to find interesting parts in that sort of chaos and then figure out a way to get my composition around that. So I don't always know what I'm doing going in, which is fine. Cool. Will I ever make any tutorials on the macro photos I made? I would love to do a live stream where I'm recording that stuff live, but I need to figure out the technical side of it. But it should be doable. I have an HDMI splitter that I could use, and I think I have a second USB stick somewhere that would accept an HDMI signal into my computer. But that would be a whole setup. But I would love to do that someday. But for this stream, I'm not going to get into it because it's a whole different sort of idea. So, but yeah, I mean, if you have questions about it, just hit me up on social media. I don't mind answering questions. But a lot of that stuff as well is very similar to the way I work in 3D. It's just getting lucky, mixing stuff, hoping it reacts in an interesting way, and just getting lucky. So let me switch to my face for a little bit while I answer questions. So if you do find time to make a geometry nodes course based on RGMG, can you make it like really project based? We'll see. I don't know what I'm going to do with it if I end up doing it. I think it's mostly going to be focused on like modeling and doing weird stuff with it. Like a lot of the stuff that I've shown here, kind of going in depth, building it and showing some of my thoughts. But I would actually start with some of the basics of how I understand geometry nodes to begin with, because I feel like there's a lot of really great tutorials on making cool stuff with geometry nodes, but to fully unlock the power of it, I would like to be able to almost talk about the underlying idea behind it, which I'm sure people have done, don't get me wrong. I just want to make sure that, yeah, it's relevant and interesting, and that they don't change stuff when I do, because I'm almost happy I didn't make it for 2.93. That was my original intention, but if I would have done that, then the course wouldn't have been right because they changed it. So it's a bit of a wait and see to see what the Blender people do with geometry nodes. So I guess people drown in the tutorial spiral. Yeah, there's a chance of that as well if you just kind of keep making tutorials and not try, yeah, your own stuff. Like just try your own stuff, mess with it. You know, I fail a lot. You can see, especially in the other one, there's like 3 renders out of like 7 projects. So there's stuff there that I'm not going to show because it just didn't pan out. I tried it and didn't work out, and that's fine too. Is there a way to make a similar multi-layer transparent rendering of lines and layers as on the reference? I'm assuming the like chip stuff. Yeah, you could go pretty deep into shader nodes to do that, but I think I'm the wrong person to ask that. You, I'm sure there's a way. Yeah, but I can't think of one off the top of my head, is my honest answer. So, can you show the node setup from the last stream about that face with wireframe modifier on new fields nodes? Oh, yeah, it's actually quite similar in that, sure, I'll do that one because it's kind of an update to the last one. That's fine. Let's bring in that same base mesh again, so we just have something to work with. We've got another, yeah, I've got another 40 minutes. That should be doable. But I want to make sure I answer all the questions. So let's grab it. And the idea of the technique is still exactly the same. I don't know why I copied it. I meant to just smooth it out. There we go. I'm still scattering stuff on it and then using the geometry proximity. It's just slightly different because they changed it to fields. But yeah, but it should be fairly quick to set up. So let's grab it, go to geometry node editor, add new geometry nodes, and then start the whole process over again. So let's move it up. And then let me just add in, actually, let's add in our wireframe so we can see what we're doing, and we don't want to have the optimal display. So we can just start with this. Then we're going to throw on some points. So distribute points on faces, then go to instances, and then we're going to instance on the points. No, that's instances 2 points. I want instances on points. There we go. And then as an instance, let's just grab a, and it's nice that we can do all of this stuff in geometry nodes now that we don't have to mess with extra stuff. So maybe I'll show the reference so people know what we're talking about. What were those projects called? I can't remember. Oh man, I'd have to like go to Instagram or something. I'll show them real quick just so for completion's sake, so people don't have to go back and forth if they're looking at this in the future. So the ones you're referencing are, I think, these ones. So they have like a very intricate pattern to them. Yeah, so we'll make something similar to that real quick. So what we're doing is we're instancing all the points. So to get back to that, and then I'm going to grab an icosphere and then throw that on there. Now these are huge, so let's bring these down just a bit. Or actually, let's leave the radius at 1 and we'll control the scale differently. Now, one of the things that is essential to this technique I found is that they have sort of a double layer to them. So what I mean by that, before we had these primitives, I would use a solidify modifier on an icosphere to get it. Oh, wow. Yes, people are kind of going nuts. Okay, sorry. I always forget to switch over. My bad. So I'll go back and repeat myself. Ugh, just wasted like 5 minutes on that. Sorry, guys. I didn't mean to do that. So let's see. So what we're creating from scratch, kind of, is something similar to this, where we have all the different lines and stuff going across the face. But I'd shown it before in 2.93 and with fields now. Yeah. Okay, so let's restart this whole process, throw these out, there we go, and show you where I started. Sorry again. I'll never learn, I guess. I get too excited. So I brought in that same model that we started with, just that base mesh. All I did was just add some subdivisions to it and turn on wireframes in my viewport so we can see exactly what we're doing. Yeah, so let's see. Make sure I didn't miss anything. I'll answer some of the last questions after this. So again, let's go a little bit quicker. So what we're going to do is we're going to distribute points on faces, and then we're going to instance on points. So the whole reason geometry nodes was built to begin with. And then with that, I'm going to use a mesh primitive, in this case an icosphere, because I know that works quite well, and instance it. So now we get this kind of weird shape. And what I was saying before I realized I wasn't properly sharing my screen is these are all just regular icospheres. And part of the technique was that they had a solidify modifier on them. So the way I just do this in geometry nodes now is I just get the geometry transform node and just make it like 75% scale. And then we just join the two together. There we go. And you'll see why this becomes interesting. And now you'll see both of these have different layers. And we could even, if we wanted to, if I go to search, just add in a value so we can control it uniformly. So if I set this to 0.75, now this is basically going to control my kind of solidify. It's poor man's solidify, let's call it that. So now with these all distributed, we want some randomness to the scaling as well. So we're going to add in, if we just hit search and then random value. Even though this is a vector, so we have the X, Y, and Z scale, I just use a float. So the randomness is the same. So that means you just get a random uniform scale. If you were to set this to vector, then you could have randomized scales for each Like if I plug this in, no, not to rotation, but to scale. Now you'll see each axis is randomized individually, but that's not necessarily what I want. I just want a float value going between, say, 0.25 or 0.1 and 0.5. Let's throw that in there. Excuse me. There we go. And now we have one quick way to control the minimum and maximum scale of everything. Let's up the density a little bit again. And now what I want to do is this. I need to realize these instances because I want to use them as a mesh, because I want to use them with the geometry proximity node. So I'm going to bring back in my original geometry. So if I plug this back in, you'll see we have the original geometry. And now what we could do is we could use the geometry proximity. We can add this one as the target, and then under geometry and set position, we could do the same thing we did earlier, where we were using the, we were going the other way around, where we had all the crazy lines and we were using the original mesh to bring them back. Here, what I'm doing is I'm grabbing the original mesh and I'm pushing it out to those edges and lines of the instances that we created. So we're doing the same thing, we're just doing it in the other direction. So setting that up, now you can see it's trying to form lines around those original, those original kind of instances that we created. And as we add more to these or less, that's sort of what you're trying to look for. Now we can see as we add the size, we get these really kind of wild patterns. And the cool thing is, I'm going to go back to my subdivision surface up here. As you add more in, you get kind of that feeling of those, because there's more geometry to work with, you get more snapping. And again, in the geometry proximity node, whether we set it to points, now we just get the points of those instances. We can set it to edges to really kind of go for the edges, or we can set it to faces so that it snaps. So that's how you get that kind of interesting look. So it still works the same way. It's just the node setup is slightly different because of fields. But if anything, it's gotten a little bit easier to set up. Like, the fairly minimal node setup, we can get kind of wild ideas. And again, you could change the density, the seed, you can do all kinds of stuff with it. These are still even pointing the same way. So I could, again, hook the rotation up just to get more random rotation. We could do all kinds of stuff with it, but for now, this is just the quickest way to set it up. Now to render those, I didn't actually use a wireframe modifier. So again, I'm just going to add a single area light and move it up. Oh yeah, and this mesh is huge because I forgot to scale it down, but that's fine. Grab the light, go kind of apeshit with it. Make sure we have some light here. So that could work. Let's see if we can set it to shade flat. It listens to the shade flat, which is nice. But the cool thing is, because this mesh already originally has mesh data, I think if we change the shader, if I'm right, it should just work, yeah. And rather than trying to put a wireframe modifier on here and rendering it that way, what I ended up doing for most of these renders is in the shader nodes, you have a little wireframe thing here, and that just gives you all your wires. And because they're all, because they've been distorted and they're all, wow, can't think of the word now, triangles, wow. You could just use that to shade. So what I would do is just have a sort of a base layer that's really dark and maybe has a little bit of reflection on it, and then use that wireframe as a mask. So let's mix the shader. There we go. And then add something maybe like a metal shader into there. So have the principled BSDF, set this to metallic, and then maybe up the, or lower the roughness, up the roughness. Maybe not metallic. You can see there's a lot here to experiment with, but then you get that nice contrast between the lines and the base shape, and you get that cool sort of interesting, intricate feeling. With a nice little fall off from the light. Obviously, as we would change the light, it would become more visible. I think this one can move forward a little bit just to add more to the face. And then you can see this interesting stuff. And depending on which shape you've used for your original node setup, you're going to get wildly different results. Well, maybe wildly different is a little over the top, but you could very easily, this icosphere, if we just put a little dot node in between here, we could swap it out for anything. So, and because I've left the radius at 1 and do all the scaling afterwards, we can use this with a, let's see, let's try cone, see what happens. So now we get the cone shape. I think to get the cone to look right, what we could do is rather than have the rotation match the mesh, here you can see they're all pointing the same way, so you get really weird stuff. And for me, this is like the most beneficial thing about geometry nodes and modifiers for that matter. You've set it up and then you can just start messing around with it. So we could copy this random value, and in this case, I am going to set it to vector. Unless I'm wrong, I believe the math is done in radians. So yeah, if you want a full 360-degree randomness, I think it's pi you have to put in. I don't know if pi actually works. Yeah, it does. There we go. And then you get the full 360 degrees. And now you can see with random rotation, we still get that feeling of those cones in there. And then depending on how many segments we bring this down to, you can see it's a fairly quick effect even. You can have triangular cones, we can have 8 segments for the cones. And again, because we do this little transform, like if I would plug this in directly, because we don't have that solidify, you see the shapes are less defined. And I found that just by adding that in, you get that sort of double line of each shape, and it just makes it look interesting. Again, I'm here to destroy meshes, not to create beautiful looking ones. Or perfect edge loops and all that kind of stuff. You're at the wrong address for that. But yeah, again, iterate, try stuff. If we grab something else, so let's see, what else do we have here? A line could work, but I don't think that's going to do much. Let's see if we just grab a grid. Yeah, even that could be interesting somehow. You get all the different grids. You can get like grid-like structures somehow in it. And it's just all about having fun. So if we go back to our lines here, you can see. And even just changing the fill type to triangles might do something, but there's not that many n-gons to move it around. But again, you could translate them. You could push them in and out, as you can see. You could, yeah, I think the z-axis would probably be the best. So there you can see as they're moving around. So much stuff to explore. Again, it's up to you to have fun with it. So you can see them moving in and out almost. And you could animate all that stuff, and then you could get really wild, crazy things. I think one of my last loops, let's see, is it the last one that I posted? I think so. Was it? No, that was that one. That one was huge. It was like 6K, I think. It was insane. It was the one before that, though, that I want to show. Yeah, this one. So here you can see I haven't animated any of the instances, but the mesh that I've mapped them on, it's the same technique, but the mesh that I've mapped them on has an displacement modifier on it. So I think it's just even a plane with a texture that's just moving a little bit. And because the things change so much, the positions of the instances change so much, yeah, you can see there were triangles. You can kind of see it all moving around. And it makes these really interesting, weird looking things. I don't know. I don't even know what to name it, honestly. But again, good times. So yeah, that's that one real quick. A bonus round, lightning round. So let's see. I'm going to go back right before everybody was freaking out about me not showing what I was doing. I think there was one last question that I wanted to answer. So somebody said, how about using LuxCore for that? So for dispersion, you can also use LuxCore render, but I don't know if it supports Blender 3.0 yet. I think it does support Blender 2.93. So if you're using geometry nodes, it's kind of a pain in the butt. But yeah, they have a really nice dispersion shader. You can do amazing stuff with. It's a really nice renderer as well. So hello from Russia, hello from Belgium. More stuff. Extruding is back in the daily builds. Yes, that's nice. That's good. Can you explain the shader, how you colored the cubicles? The little cubes. To do the full shader, I don't know if we have enough time, but honestly, for the cubes, because it's all one object. So under input, you have the little geometry thing and the shading nodes. This little random per island node will give you a random value between 0 and 1 for each individual part of the mesh that's disconnected from one another. And that one you could pipe into a color ramp and just put colors in, then you get random colors. If you search for this on YouTube, you'll get like 1,000,001 tutorials, I would say. So, am I a full-time 3D artist? Yeah, pretty much, but I've been branching out to film and photography as well lately. What should I add to a reel/portfolio to build as a designer? It can be kind of confusing to know what stuff I should add or make, as 3D has so many areas. Okay, this is going to seem like an overly simplified answer, but just add the stuff that you would love to make every single day. Because if you're going to add stuff to your reel that you think clients want to see, but that you're not really into, and clients start contacting you for making stuff that you're not into, then you're not going to have as much fun. And yeah, I know it sounds weird, but for me, it made a really big difference once I kind of restructured my portfolio and just put in the stuff that I think is cool, that I enjoy creating. And I noticed that, yeah, I started getting more jobs, that like more jobs in the same vein. So yeah. So can't see your screen, can't see your screen, can't see your screen. Like a crash in slow motion. Well, thank you, brother of mine. Yes. Yeah. Okay, cool. So here we're back. So I have a lot of anxiety in creating a portfolio too. It'd be great if you could talk about curating our personal portfolio with a consistent style of work. I tend to shy away from that stuff because art is extremely subjective, and I can't decide for you what should be in your portfolio. I can only tell you the stuff that was told to me and the stuff that I've learned over the years. Only put the stuff in there that you want to make on a day-to-day basis and the stuff that's the best. It's better to have a small portfolio with a bunch of kick-ass stuff than have a really large portfolio with a bunch of trash in there. So yeah, I mean, it's easy for me to say now because I'm at a point where I've been doing this for years, so I have so much work that I like that I can easily put together. But even cutting a reel for me is still a pain in the butt because there's so much stuff that I'm not sure if I want to put it in there or not. So unfortunately, yeah, I don't think I'm the best person to ask that because I dump everything on social media and then every couple of months I realize I have to update my website. So there you go. Let's try to go for the face again one last time. So I'm reading. Um, so yeah, but yeah, portfolio wise, find the websites that work for you. Like, I don't know, a lot of people don't realize that I'm also on Behance and ArtStation, but yeah, I just dump stuff on there every couple of months. It's not as interactive as Twitter and Instagram, for example. So yeah, there we go. Um, there we go. Do 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 do. Dun, dun, dun. Okay. Another art stream. It's the first time I'm even hearing about geometry nodes. Wow. Sorry for that crash course. Might have been a little bit much if that's the first time you've heard of it. What are my thoughts on daily renders? If you like doing daily renders, do daily renders. If you don't like doing it, don't do it. When I first started my Instagram thing, I tried to do 3 renders a week, and after a while, I stopped because it was too much. It has to stay fun. Like on a more personal note, the last couple of months, the reason I've been branching out to photography and film a lot is because I was getting sick of 3D, and not because I'm sick of 3D, but mostly because I felt like I was repeating myself a lot and I needed to do something else. So, yeah, Doesn't matter how long you've been doing stuff or how old you get. Sometimes you kind of have to realize, like, hey, you still having fun? If no, go do something else for a bit. It's fine, you know. Um, yeah. So I think we're wrapping up. So if there's any last questions while I'm answering these, go for it. And other than that, I think, yeah, we're pretty good to go. So, do, 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 do. Just a heads up. 360 degrees is 2 times pi, aka tau. So there you go. So actually, it should have been 2 times pi. So that's good to know. I'll do that correctly next time. Thank you for that. In the math node, there is a 2 radians conversion. Could be helpful. Yeah. I'm just lazy. I don't want to add more nodes than I have to add. But yeah, cool. Please adjust your DPI settings. It's harmful to the eyes. I asked in the beginning if it was okay, and people seemed to say it was all right, but I still have no idea if it actually streamed in 4K or not, which is something I'm gonna have to look at because I use a different stream key, and yeah, it's been a while. So it only did HD, didn't it? Bastards. Oh well. Oh, demonetized because I swore. There we go. But I'll keep an eye on it next time. So. There we go. Working along here, yeah. Hello, Midge. Just got from work. It's our stream. So pumped. How you doing? Just asking. I'm doing all right. Doing a lot better than a couple months ago. Like I said, I needed to branch out and do some new stuff. So, yeah. OpenSea, I have. Yeah, generally NFT wise. Lately I haven't posted as many. My stuff is on OpenSea, some of it, because I started out on the Ethereum blockchain, but now it's mostly on Tezos. So I think the best place to look for NFTs of mine is object, so objkt.com, and then I think it's slash profile. I can't even remember. Profile slash at Mantissa. I think that's the way you type it. Nope. Is it just object.com slash at Mantissa? Page not found. It's somewhere in there. Is it without the at? Let's see. I'm on there anyway. If there's an NFT version of something that yeah, there we go. So it's just objkt.com, object.com slash profile slash Mantissa, and here you can see all the stuff. And the reason I mainly switched to this one is because Ethereum does use a lot of like energy and stuff still until they've figured out the switch to a different way of working, and this blockchain already does that. So it's a very minimal energy use, and it doesn't cost a lot of money to mint stuff either, which is nice too. So if you want to check it out, check it out, and if you don't. NFTs are kind of a weird thing right now. People get super angry about it, but I don't know. Like, I'm trying not to destroy the planet. I'm trying to make the right choices. But there's a lot more going on. The conversation is not very nuanced right now, which is unfortunate. But so will there be a geometry node tutorial video? I don't know. I'm not gonna promise stuff. Like the only reason I'm doing this is because I had some free time unexpectedly this afternoon. So yeah, I think it's time to start wrapping up. So thank you everybody for being here. Thank you everybody that stayed to the end. I hope you had a nice afternoon. I definitely did. Yeah, if there's anything else, just you can find me on all the social media and stuff, all that good stuff. So cool. Namaskaram, your fan from India. Nice. Well, greetings from Belgium. Cool. Yeah, most of these NFTs are for sale. People are asking if I sell them, but yeah, I mean, yeah, it's whatever. I'm just trying stuff like everybody else. I don't really have a grand plan for them or anything. So cool. With that said, have a lovely afternoon. I'll see you, yeah, at some point. I'll see you soon, I guess. Who knows? Yeah, keep on making cool stuff and goodbye. And now I have to make sure I hit the end stream button at the right time.